Okay, everybody. I'd like to introduce our guest tonight. My guest is Larry Ashton. Larry is a financial guy and a real estate agent and mortgage broker here in our local area. And we've talked extensively about hunting and kind of some of the challenges set forth in planning and paying for hunting trips, etc. So with that, Larry, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on the show, Brian.
Absolutely, buddy. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Tell us who you are and your history and your qualifications and what you do.
Well, my name's Larry Ashton, as you mentioned, and right now I own Remax Land and Home that serves southern and southwest Idaho. And I also own and manage Great Rates Home Loans, which is a mortgage broker company. Been doing this for a total of about 30 years. Started out as a firefighter and jumped into lending in real estate, and the rest was history.
Fireman, great. How long did you do that for?
About 15 years total.
15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, as you know, I'm in law enforcement, and us and firemen, we've had our issues over the past, but it's fine.
Hey, they both dial 911 when they want to call us.
The world's second responders. All right. So let's talk about kind of why we're here. Um, Hunting. And we had some conversations about it. But what do you know? And I obviously know that you're a non-hunter, but you don't have any challenges with it.
No, I actually, it's on my bucket list is to go out someday and get my own elk. We live on 35 acres, and so we have some neighbors that hunt here. They every year pull a couple animals off our property, and I help them pack them out. But right now, work is and family life is very consuming, and kind of like what we talked about, it's a commitment that takes time and money. And so when time becomes more available, that's something I hope to do.
It's a pretty good goal, and you do have a beautiful piece of property up here, um, here in the West Central Mountains. So hunting is for many people, it's a food source. Okay, it's also a form of recreation, if we want to call it that. But I mean, we go out into the woods, we camp, we hang out with family, we do um, lots of different things in our off time, and that is enjoyable to us. The hunting part of it is it means to an end, but it's kind of a well-rounded uh, activity.
Correct.
Unfortunately, just like everything else in the world, hunting has become increasingly more expensive, even for those people that don't necessarily go too far away from home to do it. Just with inflation and fuel prices and food prices, everything going into it, it's becoming more and more. It takes more and more resources in order to just even go on an in-state Idaho hunt now compared to what it used to be. And then there are those of us that travel around the United States doing different places. Like, for example, I'm headed to Oregon, very likely on an antelope hunt in September. And I'm going to turn around from that, and we're going to hunt deer and elk here in Idaho in two different locations. One in the extreme northern part of the state for my elk tag. And then in November, I'm turning around and I'm jumping on a plane. And I'm headed to Virginia for 10 days on a whitetail deer hunt in the backcountry in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Not inexpensive.
Right.
And there are others like me. One of the things that I wanted to discuss and why I brought you on is so that we could talk about the fact that these things are expensive. And if you're newer to hunting, or if you are trying to start doing some adventure hunts and you're trying to do some planning, etc., how do you start that process to financially afford these hunts now and also later in life? For example, a sheep hunt in Canada or Alaska, for example, is running upwards of $60,000 now.
Hmm.
60 grand to go hunt a sheep. And that's obviously, with a licensed outfitter, there's a lot to it. But getting the tag, it's just an expensive uh, endeavor now. And even when I was younger, it was still 15,000 to 30,000, depending on where and what and how, even, 15 years ago. So kind of with that in mind, I kind of like to do this in 2 tracks if we could. So one, let's start with I'm a youngster, which I'm not, but I'm a youngster and I'm interested in hunting and I'd like to do some things in the Intermountain West in Alaska and Canada, other places. And I'd like to save some money on an annual basis. And then what I would need to do to save some money on a long-term basis for these adventure hunts, like a sheep or a moose or whatever the case may be in some of these these long lost places in Canada and Alaska.
Right.
And then once we get through that, then we'll move on to, okay, so I'm not so young anymore. Now what?
Okay.
Okay, so let's start there.
Well, first of all, when I talk to people who are hunters, people who come on our property and hunt, who are very serious about what they do, I do notice they put a lot of time into it. They're putting up webcams, they're hiking areas, they're scoping out different valleys, they're looking for where there might be a watering hole back in the
Sure.
country. Hours and hours of hiking, studying, sighting in the gun, making sure they got the right type of ammunition and the rifle for what they're going out and doing. And so the people that I see that are successful, one person pulls a couple animals off our property every year. They're very, very serious. It's not something that they think of doing last minute and then go out and see success right off the bat. And the patterns that I see in people that are successful in hunting are very similar to the same patterns I see in people that are successful in business or sports, whether it be, football, martial arts, even to people that play instruments. It takes a lot of time, focus, dedication, sacrifice, and like you've mentioned, it takes money. And I think one of the most important things to do is when you're setting this goal, and again, this goal setting is very similar to many, many other things that we try to plan to do. We need to first put together a realistic budget and say, okay, what do I think this is really going to cost me to do? And what is my pathway to achieving the funds to do that? They also need to look and say, what's my time commitment? Again, scoping out areas, putting up the webcams, purchasing the right rifle, sighting it in. How are they going to plug the time into that, especially if they're a family? How are they going to put those pieces together? And then do they have the type of job that's going to allow them to take that time off? Do they have an employer who's cooperative with them? If they work for a small company and everybody in the company hunts and somebody always has to be there, that means somebody doesn't get to go that year. So when I talk to people about planning for different things, I use the term pathways. What is the pathway to get you to where you want to go and is it achievable? And if it's not, then you need to readjust that pathway, that finance, that time off. Now, in other goal setting, I'm a believer for the most part that most people can achieve most of the goals that they set, but those goals come at a cost and a price. And so you have to ask yourself, am I willing to take that cost to do that? Am I willing to make this sacrifice for this goal? And if the answer is yes, then move forward with it. If the answer is no, say, okay, can I fine tune this? And I've actually talked to some people where they want to set the goal. So you mentioned hunting up in Canada. That's a big goal that a lot of people can achieve. But and to obtain that goal may mean looking for a different type of job. So you talked about as you get older. When you're young, you may say, hey, I don't have the money to go do that. I can hunt here locally. I could build up my skills. But you need to look at your career track. $30,000, $40,000 is a lot of money for the average income in the United States. And
Yeah.
again, making sure your goals are realistic with what your expectations are and what your ability is.
Okay. I'd never really, it makes sense, but I've never really equivalated it back to being successful in business to being successful in the field, to be honest. That's the first time I've heard that analogy that actually is pretty fitting, particularly given what we're talking about. And what I often see or hear of with people, and I've been guilty of it myself in younger years, but is the great plastic card.
Yeah.
So and there are a lot of states that require, New Mexico for one, Idaho being another, they require you to purchase your license and tags and different things up front. And then you put your application in, and then if you don't draw,
Right.
they refund it. So the state gets to keep your money that you're paying interest on because of the great plastic card.
Right.
And that's really the only way to do it. You have to have a plastic card to do that. What I've done personally is I have one that's dedicated to that.
Okay.
And then so the funds go out, and then the states reimburse it minus your fees, and then I go back through and work on a payoff process for this year's tags and license and application fees for the stuff that I actually drew, and then add in because every state has a cost. You
Right.
put in your fee and your application and your license, you get a refund on most of it, but yeah, all of it, right? So, but what I hear is that people are gaining balances, right?
Uh-huh.
And paying interest on those balances, and then some of it doesn't get paid off. And I think the better thing would be to figure out a way to put that money away into some sort of an investment, stocks, bonds, IRA, whatever. I guess you can't use an IRA unless because it's for retirement, but you know what I'm saying, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. What can these kids do now to start rat holing this money away now so that they have that sum for their draws on their plastic card that they can pay that off when it's done in the spring drawing season.
Right.
And then what do they need to, I mean, obviously we don't have any hard numbers, but what does somebody need to do um, to start if they want to do this in Alaska?
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned credit cards, and credit cards are very dangerous, but they're also a very important part of our lives.
That's a tool.
It's a tool,
Sure.
and we're getting to where we're becoming what we call a cashless economy.
Oh, I know.
Now, some people will say it's the government because they want to spy on you, but the reality is it's the younger generation that you're talking about. They don't carry cash anymore. I heard a
Hey,
story.
buddy, I've been married for 30 years. I don't carry cash anymore either.
Yeah, I heard
So,
I heard a story of, a person, they were in New Orleans, and they walked by a beggar, and the beggar said, "Can you spare a couple dollars?" And he said, "I don't have any," and the beggar challenged him and said, "Oh, no, you got money," and he goes, "Dude, I don't have any money. I got a credit card. If you have a credit card machine here, I'll give you 5 bucks." You know? And so, it's just the direction we're going. I don't see credit cards as evil if they're used as a tool like you mentioned. You're taking a
mm,
vacation. You should have 2 credit cards. So if one gets hacked, you could still put gas in your car and buy food. So it's not the credit card. It's kinda like saying guns kill people. Guns don't kill people kill people, right? And it's the credit card isn't evil, it's a tool, but when it's
right.
misused, that's when it becomes dangerous. And you think about somebody that puts $1,000 balance on their credit card over a year, they're gonna pay about $200, if not more, in interest. That $200 could go to purchasing a trail cam or something else. So we wanna be really smart about this. As far as savings goes, a lot of people recommend you try to save about 10% of your income and you put it into account. And that savings account could be for emergencies that you don't wanna touch, but it could also be for goal setting. I'll give you another story here.
Sure.
A family I knew wanted to go to Disneyland, or Disney World, I should say, down in Florida, and when you log onto that website, there's a button that says, "Plan for your trip," and then it has a credit card offer because you're gonna spend a lot of money if you do that,
Mhm.
you know? And so, again, and what these people did was they saved, I think it was like $200-300 a month for several years, and then they went to Disney World and paid cash for it and, didn't hold back. They went out and had a really good time. So, to the young person, I would say set that goal. You mentioned, I think, New Mexico,
Yeah, that's one way.
where they
Yeah.
have those fees is that may be a year or 2 year down the road. Put together your budget. In the meantime, if you can hunt locally, hone your skills in, get better at what you're doing, and then have that goal. Okay, in 3 years, this is where I wanna go, and in 10 years, this is where I wanna
Right.
go, and then start that savings. And then you mentioned, how do you save? Well, I'll get a little technical here, but there's 5 places you could put your money. There's cash, stocks, bonds, real estate, and commodities. Okay. I'm kind of a low risk guy. If you put your money just in the bank, they're going to pay you a whopping 0.002% or something. And
Yeah,
it'll be
it's not
pennies a
great.
month. And so try to find some type of interest bearing savings account like at Fidelity or Schwab where they're paying you 4%, even on a couple $100, and maximize every dollar you get. That extra few dollars can change the experience of your hunt. So be smart and diligent about it. The other is we talked about athletes. I've worked with athletes in business, and that competitive nature that makes them good at what they do actually makes them better at business. That's why you see so many sports athletes that succeed so well in business because they have that competitive nature. They have that desire to succeed and not let the competition get ahead of them. And I think if you view your desire to hunt as a competition, you are going to make it happen. You are going to save. You are going to have the job you need. That competitive nature in it, I don't know if you've heard that before. Be competitive with your goal. Make it happen, and it will happen.
So, and again, not to belabor the numbers, but if I wanted to do this sheep hunt in northern British Columbia, right, the
Mhm.
Cassiar Mountains or whatever, on this adventure hunt and pay the $60,000. And my plan is to do that when I'm okay. We're going back in time. Let's say I wanted to do this before I turned 50. I'm well beyond 50 now, but let's just say that was my plan. And starting as a 22 or a 25 or a 26-year-old kid, obviously looking at interest and stuff, but what kind of money do you think they would have to shell rat hole each month in order to make that have that money available to them? Rough numbers now. I know
Rough
we
number,
have a
sure.
calculator in front of us and all that stuff. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, just some rough figures as to what so these kids have an idea of what to be thinking.
So, you mentioned, $60,000. So let's say over 20 years, they would wanna save $3,000 a month. That's not even using compounding, so that'd be about 250 a month. And again, the shorter duration, if it's a 20-year plan, you
You mean
maybe
$3,000 a year?
yeah, $3,000 a
Okay.
year. Yeah, so it just I would divide it in, but factoring you're gonna get compounding and other benefits to it, and that may sound like a lot of money, but, it's less than a car payment under most circumstances. And when you look at, I'm kind of into the philosophical
Sure.
part of things. So when you look at a vacation, it's one of those times in life where you spend money and it's maybe not the best business decision, but there's a balance between doing what you like, what turns you on, and having the
Right.
business aspect of it. And if it's your desire to go on this hunt and do it, and you think you could get there, start the goal.
Yeah.
It's exciting to watch your money grow, and you could think about it.
Right.
I remember when I was a little kid and, unfortunately, my birthday and Christmas were only a couple months apart, and there was this Schwinn bicycle that I wanted so bad, and my parents said, "It's too much money just for your birthday or Christmas. We're gonna combine the 2 of them, and you'll get the bicycle, but it's gonna be in Christmas." For 2 months, I walked around with that brochure in my pocket, and every day I would open it up and look at that bike and dream about the bike I wanted, and that's what you should do if you have this
Right.
goal. Make it happen. Don't think like, "Oh, that's a lot of money." Don't let people tell you you're wasting the money. If it's something that you really wanna do, set the goal and do it. There's no rules about saying you can't do it.
Right.
Obviously, you wanna be responsible in other parts of your life, but it's not one or the other, it's both. Do them both.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree, and that's why I wanted to have somebody that's on as an expert in this stuff instead of just my opinion on some things. And we have these we have people that I know that are my son and my son-in-law and some others that want to do some of these hunts, and I'm basically came up with this idea, this podcast for their benefit more than anything else. But if it helps some other people down the road, a couple $100 a month, $200-300 a month to put into some sort of a growth account is really not that big a deal on the grand scheme of things. And then you have that money available to you to do that thing when you're ready to pull the trigger on it.
exactly, and it's not that you're waiting 20 years to hit your goal. You have goals in between that,
Sure.
hunting locally, spending some money doing different things.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is interesting about goal setting and discipline, and a lot of people think of discipline as a negative thing. To me, discipline is what helps you achieve the life you want to have.
Hmm.
I think I told you the story about a relative who, when they retired, set 3 goals. They wanted to watch Netflix movies, they wanted to get good at video games, and they wanted to get back in shape. Guess which one they didn't achieve?
I'm going to guess off of that series of goals, the in shape is probably the one.
Yeah, bingo. Good
Yeah.
job. So when you look at that, why did they not succeed? Because it takes discipline, and they didn't have it. It's easy to have discipline in something you wanna do. It's hard to have it in something that takes work, like saving money.
Right.
So the goal of this hunt is what you want, but it does take discipline. But I believe that having discipline in life improves the quality of life rather than haphazardly going through life without a goal, without a direction,
No, I
or
would
without
agree.
a plan.
I would agree with that.
And the people I see that do that, they seem to be happier. In the loan biz between loans and real estate, I've closed around 2,000 deals. I've interviewed around 6,000 people, and I've seen people that are super happy and people that just aren't happy at all. Once a person is making a decent income, and I'm talking medium income for the United States, I don't see an increase in their happiness level. So in other words, if the medium income, let's say, is 70,000 and somebody's making 700, often I don't see the person making 700 any happier than the person making 70. And
Oh,
so,
interesting.
yeah, and well, we talked about it. At a middle income, you could plan good hunts. You could achieve most of the goals you want. You could buy a Flamin' steak once in a while for dinner. You could sleep on a comfortable bed. And really, what I think, in my observation, that makes people happy is being around people where they have good relationships with them. And
Concur. Yep.
yeah, and so one of the things too, like I like to tell a lot of stories, but I remember once I was at a motocross race down in Anaheim, and they do tailgate parties, and somebody said to me, the tailgate party is more fun than watching the race. Okay, I've talked to people when they go hunting, they set up their elk camp. They have more fun sitting around the fire at night than they do hunting.
Sure.
They're out in the woods, and so,
Yeah.
again, it's the relationship part of it.
Sure.
It's that connecting, I believe, with nature, connecting. The one person
Mhm.
I was with when they got an elk, they did a little, I don't know, like spiritual
A ritual. Sure.
ritual, kiss
Hmm.
their fingers and touch the forehead. I thought that was kinda cool, you
Yeah.
know?
Everybody has their own thing, but yeah, those of us that are um, dedicated to this activity are also dedicated to conservation, et cetera. And it's a thing. I'll be honest with you. It's a thing to snuff out a life and put it in my freezer. It's not something taken lightly. It's not something that the hunt itself is enjoyable, but the action of taking a life is not.
Right,
It's oftentimes anticlimactic and um, a bit of a letdown very often because obviously now there's a lot of work to do. My hunt is over because I filled my tag.
yeah.
There's there's a lot to it, right? And so the act of taking a life is not the 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 quote air quotes fun that some people think. Some people that believe that it may be. It's just not like that. So in our world, it's the planning that you talked about, right? As we've discussed, it's the putting the money away and saving for a rainy day and the next time we want to go on one of these trips. It's putting everything together and getting your gear together. I mean, I have spreadsheets for my gear depending on what time of year, what the weapon system is I'm going to be using and where I may be headed. And I have multiple spreadsheets with all the different gear lists that I need for each one of those deals. I pull them up, I check the list off, I make sure it's there. And it's a living document, so I keep it fresh throughout the year. So the hunt is about more than just going out and pulling the trigger or letting a release go on your bow. It's about the experience. For a lot of people, the camp and being together with family and all that stuff is that experience of traditional deer camp. They're a ton of fun.
You reminded me of that quote. It's not the destination; it's the journey.
Sure.
Again, I like to use examples. My daughter's learning how to ride a horse, and sometimes every 3 days she's in tears, and I have to say, "Remember, you're doing this because you like it. It's fun.
It's
You
fun.
have a passion." And I try to let her know, don't think of your failures as failures, but as steps to getting better. If you never
Right.
fail, you're never going to get better.
Correct.
A person once told me, one of my early fire captains, he says, if you're always achieving your goals, you're shooting too low. And
Mhm.
so I think about that. This goal setting, is the journey going to be fun all the time? No. What part of it's not fun? Saving. What other parts aren't fun? Maybe when it's raining, when you didn't want it to rain.
Sure.
But it's that destination, or I'm sorry, that journey, that often is when you look back on a hunt, I'm assuming based on what you said,
Mhm.
you're like, "Hey, man, I spent 4 days with my friends. We got to catch up. They're childhood people I know. The weather was great. I was out in nature."
Mhm.
What part of it do you remember the most when you look back on your most successful hunts? Do you look at actually pulling the trigger, or do you look at the journey that got you up to that point? I think that's a pretty interesting question to ask.
It is. And you know, the solid answer to that, and I'll go back to a mule deer hunt I did with a muzzleloader in Utah in 2023. Hunting the desert Southwest was a goal. I was able to draw a tag that year. Shouldn't have, but I drew the one random tag that Utah offered for this unit, and I made the most of it. I went down there. I went down in the summer. I did some scouting. I spent a 4-day camping trip. I went back during my season. Got there 4 days early. Did the same thing. Just rode around and did a bunch of hiking into the mountains in this spot and to see what was moving around, and then had a great experience.
Yeah.
I did shoot a pretty nice buck with my black powder rifle that hunt, which was great. Uh, you know, Actually harvesting an animal and putting in a truck and bringing it home to the freezer was awesome. But I'd never been to this spot in Utah, and then in that year I went there twice. Got to experience the entire lay of the land. Got the whole thing. I did it solo, so I was by myself. It was a pretty great experience, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it had nothing to do with the shooting that mule deer buck.
Isn't it interesting how so many things are like that? My dad, before he passed away, I took him snowmobiling up in the Gospel Wilderness, and it was just 2 feet of powder, sunny day, no wind, temperature was just right, and just an incredible day. And on the way back home, he said to me, if I died right now, I would be a happy guy. That was just incredible. And I remember that a million times more than I
Hmm.
do the experience. And
For sure.
my guess is, even though I haven't gone out and had the opportunity to get an animal myself, my guess is there's moments that stand out in each hunt
Mhm.
that were epic, um, and maybe not necessarily the actual taking down of the animal. And so that's why I like the idea of the planning, but that making that planning fun, making it exciting. Like you said, you have spreadsheets, you have check off lists.
Mhm.
Same thing when in my job. Sometimes I have to remember I'm doing this because I want to, and
Right.
if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Correct. And you know, to that end, um, going back to the 200-300 bucks a month that we were talking about earlier is really not that big a deal.
Right,
I mean, for somebody it might be, and if for somebody a couple $100 a month is a big deal, probably ought to hunt more locally until that isn't a big deal.
right.
Understood. But for most of us that are going to be listening, it's not. It's like, meh, okay.
Yeah,
Um, but big picture, I'm putting all this money away, and then I'm spending money on applications and bonus points and purchasing points in different states, all these different things, and then buying tags and licenses in my home state of Idaho for, and I'll just use elk, bull elk tag for a harvest percentage of about 8%. So 8% of us are going to fill a tag. So,
right.
right?
But can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
So I believe. Okay, so again, I'm going to tell you another story. My son's an avid mountain biker, bicycle rider, traveled around the world. He was up at Cutty Mountain up here during he was mountain biking, and he said on the road it was like that opening scene to Jellystone Park with Yogi Bear, where the cars are just lined up. He said on the main road, cars just up and down, people trying to find an animal, looking through their binoculars. He got off on some single track, and a mile off the main road, he said there was a herd of elk, and nobody was there.
Hmm.
And so, while there may be an 8% success rate, my guess is it's the same 20% of the people every year that are serious
It
that are
is.
getting it. And so,
The 80/20 rule does apply there for sure.
and I know you, and I know you're usually successful. I have 2 neighbors that are usually successful. May not mean that they fill every tag, but they do several hunts a
Sure.
year, and their freezer's never empty. So I don't wanna belittle the effort that it takes, but I think that if you take a person that's focused, they will get their tags filled usually. Maybe not all the time,
Right.
but again, remember, it's the journey, not the destination,
Sure.
you
But
know?
in terms of what I mean, just looking at the big picture, right? Yeah, there are
Yeah,
those of us that fill most, not most, but I'll fill one or two of my tags every year, right? And I'll have tags in numerous different states. I put a lot of effort into that side of it, right? But think about it from the grand picture. I'm going to put all this money away. I'm going to do all this planning. I'm going to do all these different things for 8%.
Yeah. Yeah.
For 8%. And it takes, a special person to want to do that. Now, there are those guys that hunt the roads and they're there for their motivations are way different,
Right.
right? Those guys are really there for the camp, the experience, the fun, right? I get
Right.
it. They're not putting a lot of effort in, but those of us that put a lot of effort in, my experience is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I get motivation with talking about sports and those different things, right? I get enjoyment out of the effort I'm putting into it and then the effort I get back out of it.
Right.
So
Yeah, you mentioned it should be fun. If
it's
you're
gotta be
not
fun.
having fun, and that doesn't mean it's always fun, then you need to question whether you have a realistic goal for yourself.
Well, and why am I continuing to spend money doing it?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be something in return, right? You have to have the return on the investment, even if it's not financial.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. So kind of moving on, shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about old folks like us. So we're in our, mid 50s. Some of the folks listening might even be beyond that. And they want to hunt every year and they want to hunt in their home state and they want to do kind of what I'm doing by applying in multiple different states. Probably a little bit late at 54, 55 years old to start planning for a $60,000 sheep hunt in Canada.
Right.
That's fine. But being more realistic, let's talk about application fees, right? And I'll just bounce some numbers off you if you want to. So Nevada, for example, I had to buy a license. I think it was just for round numbers. I think the license was $130, and then I spent $60 in applications. So
Okay.
that's Nevada. Hopefully, my wife isn't listening to this. I applied in Oregon. Okay, I had to buy a $225 license, and I had to pay for. I think the application fee was cheap. I think the application was like $15 for the antelope, and then another $15 for a bonus point I purchased for a deer because I've been collecting points in Oregon as well. Colorado, same thing. Had to buy a license. Can't remember what that one was. I think that one was reasonably cheap because it's just a license. I think it was $60, but you had to buy some other stuff, and then I had to pay for the point I purchased. So I'm into Colorado, another, let's say $100. Arizona, same thing. The list goes on, right? I
Right.
mean, and then in Montana and Wyoming, I can just purchase points for this year because I'm not ready to cash those in just yet. So I have another $60 in Montana and $60 in Wyoming coming up in July, plus Idaho.
Right.
Right? I still had to get my sportsman's package, the $130 for my sportsman's package, right? And then I had to put in my controlled hunt fees at $6.25 a piece. I think that amounted to, I don't know, around $40, something like that for the different species I put in for, right? So you add that all up, just rough figures. I've got about $700 in fees and bonus points and applications in the states in the West that I put in for.
Right.
It's not, I mean, it's not super expensive on an annual basis, but when you look at the fact that you have to spend that money between January and May, I mean, it's like, that's a big chunk out of the budget each month as you're putting those things together. And again, it's on the big mean plastic card
Right.
because that's what it is, right? So how do we, as old guys, start preparing for that stuff? And, you know,
Well, so there's a lot of things to talk about on
there's some
that.
to unpackage there. I get it.
So, um, it's never too late to start saving. It's never too late to start acting financially responsible. But as we grow older, if we have been managing our finances well, we should have more opportunities to do things.
Right.
So I'm going to throw real estate into it. If a person bought a home 20, 30 years ago, they might be close to paying it off. They may have it paid down quite a bit. They may owe just a fraction of
Mhm.
what someone else did. So the key to the young people listening right now is start preparing for the future because it'll hit you in the head before you realize it. Next
Amen.
next thing you know, you'll be 60 like me and wondering where all the time went. if you're old, I don't think that older, so I'm
Sure.
60, I know there's probably people older than me. If you're at that age, again, you're looking at saving $50 a month for a year in anticipation of it. If you didn't save this year and you don't have the money, you may have to wait till next
Right.
year. I think it would be a mistake to put it on a credit card and then make payments. Again, we talked about
Sure.
good debt, bad debt a little bit. The other is look at your overall financial picture, and I'm going to tell you another story here because I think these really make a lot of sense. I had a person come into my office once. His wife had left him when she found out he had cancer. He met another lady that was a cancer survivor and a single person also. They got married and they came in to me and said, we want to get an equity loan on our home to buy a motor home." And I said, "Oh, okay, what are you thinking? 40, $50,000?" And they're like, "No, $225,000." And so, and he was a firefighter, by the way. And I said, "Are you really sure you want to spend that much money?" And he said, I almost died from having cancer. My wife's had similar experiences. We're a new family and we've done our budget. We've tracked out our retirement. This has been a dream our whole lives. It's been rough and we just want to do it." And my reply was, "Okay,
Okay.
okay." So my
But
who am I
a
to judge
quarter
some?
million dollars.
I know,
Oh my
I
gosh.
know, I know, I know. But,
Are they a band and
what's that?
are they a band and need a bus?
No,
Okay.
they won one of those diesel pushers,
Oh,
where
Jesus.
you drive down the road and tow your Jeep behind it. But every circumstance is different. To the person that's maybe living on a more modest budget, that's in their 60s, I would say be careful. To the person who maybe has a paid for home and a 401k, or
Mhm.
maybe not a paid for home, but maybe they're looking at their health and saying it's diminishing. There are alternatives. You want to be very, very careful with debt. I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. There's good debt and there's bad debt, but
Right.
I do see people get to the point to where they're living way below their means. So weigh what it is you want to do, make sound decisions, try to have that plan for tomorrow as it comes. And if you could fit it in the budget, then look at it realistically and say, can I do this? Or is it something
Right.
that I gotta do an alternative on. Every circumstance is different, so if I were to sit here on your show and say, "Unless you could pay cash for it and you save the money, you just never can do this." First of all, I would never tell anybody what to do, but I would have to say, who am I to judge them and tell them where to spend their money?
Right.
If a person wants to spend 40, $50,000 to go on a hunt and they can afford it, and they're not gonna cause suffering by doing it, I would say go for it.
Right.
It's your life. Go spend the money. You worked hard for it, and you're not gonna take it with you. You may
Yeah,
wanna
for
pass
sure
it
not
on.
gonna take it with you.
But that being said, I do believe there's always an opportunity for everybody, regardless of your age, and I'll follow that up more. So I've done lending in real estate in both Idaho and California, and people will ask me, "What's the difference financially?" And the person in California that's making $150,000 a year versus I'm gonna use the family in Idaho that's maybe making 70, I don't see much difference in their lifestyle. Things are more affordable out here, people are in lower tax brackets, and I actually believe that on that medium income, a person can do most of the things they wanna do.
Right.
They can go get an elk, they can go get a deer, they could get different animals, they could plan for the bigger hunt to Arizona or New
Sure.
Mexico, and they could still have a family and own a home and have financial security and a plan for when they get older. And I actually see and know people doing that right now. So I don't I don't think these goals that we're talking about are unrealistic. I think they're totally realistic. It's just a matter, is it what you really want to do and do you have the discipline to get yourself to that position?
That makes sense. One final thing on this topic before we move on, but and this is something that I've done. I just wanted to bounce it off you and see where you're at with it. But because the states require electronic payment, we talked about a cashless society.
Yeah.
I do have a credit card that I have that we use. It's a revolving thing. We, use it some, pay a bunch of it off. Use it some, pay a bunch of it off. But it's a mileage card with an airline, and so for a percentage of all the purchases goes into miles towards that particular airline, and then I can use those miles for travel. So last year we used the miles on on a vacation, 30th anniversary vacation to Florida, right? But I can also use them. I won't be this year, but I can also use them in the future going to places like Alaska for caribou and Sitka black-tailed deer and some other things I'll be doing. What's your? I know I carry, we carry a little balance on it, but it's not a lot. And I'm paying interest on that little balance. I get it, whatever. Um, but having that card specifically, basically dedicated to that task, good idea or no?
I think that's a good idea. I usually like to encourage people to have at least 2 credit cards, maybe 3. The ironic thing about having good credit is you have to have had debt in the past and successfully paid it off, and then achieved new credit and paid it off. If a person never had a credit card and they never had credit and they never financed anything, they wouldn't have good credit or bad credit. They would simply just not have credit.
Right.
So there's this paradox, if you will, to where to have good credit, you have to have debt. And one of the best ways I think to maintain it is with a couple of credit cards, 2 to 3, to where you charge it a little bit, you pay it off, you charge it a little bit, pay it off. Over the years, they'll look at your patterns. Typically, you want to try not to go over 25% of your limit. So if
Sure.
you have a $10,000 limit, try not to go over 2,500, there's another at 50. What's gonna make your credit score go down really quick is when you have a credit card that's maxed out,
Yeah.
because then they look and think you have a problem, which you might. I'm a big believer, switching to the airline things. A lot of those airline credit cards, they'll give you 50,000 miles if you sign up and spend X amount of dollars in
Mhm.
the first 3, 6 months. And I've actually heard of people where they'll get a new credit card, keep it, 3 credit cards every year. They cancel one and get a new one with new airline mileage, and that covers their air traveling,
Yeah.
expenses. Just by they don't have to charge up all those miles. And then the other is look at the credit card and see which one has the best mileage plan. Okay, so I have a United card and I like it. I think it's pretty good. When I go to book with mileage, they have competitive fees and stuff. Compared to my Alaska card, it seems like they always, if I'm flying somewhere where I got a layover that should only be 2 hours, they want to make it last 8 hours. And so
Yeah.
try to find the card. Well, and well, let me back up a little bit. Like, let's say your hunt's in Arizona and let's say that you're gonna be flying out of the Boise airport, find an airline that has don't sign up for an airline card that doesn't have a flight to where you wanna go.
Right.
So again, put that in your master plan. I love this type of thinking because we're bouncing ideas off each other and we're like, "Oh, here's another way I could plan for this goal that I have and have it make total sense." So
Right.
that good point you brought up there.
Yeah. I bring that up because I paid for a lot of that trip off of miles in terms of getting there and back. And
Yeah.
not all of it, because I also upgraded everything. I took the wife down there. I upgraded everything to first class
Oh, good for
the whole
you.
trip. And it was,
Yeah.
they made that whole trip first class the whole way around. It was actually a lot of fun. And it was money well spent, I'll be honest. So, but I used the miles to do that, and I still have a significant number of miles with that card.
Right.
And so all my fees, when I purchase my fees, my applications, my permits, my bonus points, et cetera, in all these different states, all that goes back in the mileage. And then when I start getting some refunds on some of that stuff, because I didn't draw or whatever the case may be, and then they don't take the points back.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
So,
That's nice.
so that's kind of why I wanted to ask you with that. So, anything else to add on saving money? And I will preface that by saying I don't think, especially for the younger audience, I don't think that this is a lot to really a lot to take in. It's really not a lot of money we're talking about. It's really doable.
Yeah.
They can afford with a limited investment to look at the states they want to hunt in and get their points, et cetera. And then they can start saving for these adventure hunts in other places along the way. And I think that's pretty awesome. I hadn't really had it. I mean, it was possible, but I hadn't really looked at the numbers that deeply before. So I thank you for that. So anything else to add to that?
Well, I just like to say, remember, it's fun.
Yep.
Enjoy the journey as much as you enjoy the destination. And I think most people, these goals are achievable. And I would just encourage you, give it 100%. Don't quit. Make it happen, and you'll get your reward. I really believe that.
Perfect. I appreciate it very much, Larry. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this. So thank you.
All right. That's the pod.
I could live live out here for the rest of my days.